Lately, I've become preoccupied with choruses as a model for conceptualizing how voices sound out living networks. I'm interested in what the sonic renegotiation of bodily boundaries can tell us about voice as a kind of operation. Voicings conjoin, gesturing between rather than heralding individuals as sites of liberalist subjecthood. I'm especially curious how joint voices, or choruses, perform a kind of shared listening. Choral voice beckons listeners into its fold with aggregational sonic momentum. It both mimics and enacts something as ecological as it is aesthetic. I come at my work with the impulse of a chorister, but ultimately I use the word chorus and choir speculatively, additively. The word performs like the signified. It's my entry point into the murky multi-species media assemblage that is bioacoustics. This research focuses on locating multi-species voices as features of collectively making, or what Donna Haraway calls sympoetic systems. My inquiry into voice binds sonic materiality with auditory perception. The two get caught in a perceptual loop, one hailing the other in an ever-emerging system. My obsession with phenomena of voicing pulls me towards some of the most threatened creatures on the planet: amphibians. I partnered with the Amphibian Natural History Lab at the University of Campinas in Brazil during their field season. Through shared experiences of listening in the field, formal and informal interview, and shadowing in the lab, I used a phenomenological, ethnographic, and arts-based approach to consider both the singing behaviors in frogs and the perceptual and affective experiences of biologists committed to their conservation. There are a number of theoretical traditions that help catalyze this inquiry. First is an interpretation of semiotics as a multi-species rather than a human-centric concept of meaning. As Eduardo Kohn points out in How Forests Think, semiosis, the creation and interpretation of signs, permeates and constitutes the living world, and it is through our partially shared semiotic propensities that multi-species relations are possible and also analytically comprehensible. Kohn's biosemiotics invites the field of representation out of the exclusive grip of language. For Kohn, as for other post-human and animal studies theorists who subscribe to relational ontologies, ethnography becomes multi-species in its scope. Bringing in sound as a substance of relation, ethnomusicologist Stephen Feld offers us the term acoustomology to help account for the situatedness of sonic knowing arising as a feature of relations. Moving beyond essentializing auditory vocabulary like soundscape and acoustic ecology, acoustomology joins acoustics to epistemology to investigate sounding and listening as a knowing in action, a knowing with and a knowing through the audible. I'm drawn to bioacoustic scientists for their unique acoustomological positioning. These biologists listen to frog voices through day and night and through shifting states of mediation. While scientific abstraction functions really well for kinds of deductive reasoning about behavioral patterns, my involvement probes for the places where bioacoustics might further account for the fundamentally relational underpinnings of vocalization. How soundings exist not only between an organism and adaptive processes, but emerge spontaneously, non-linearly, and sensuously between organisms, their environments, and the mediating technologies and perceptual worlds that receive and interpret them. As Mickey Valley points out, a voice is not so much about the subject of the sounds it makes, it also speaks to the place the voice and the body co-inhabit. With Valley, as with Kohn, we find ourselves thinking in terms of relations rather than in terms of essential subjects. The subtractive empiricism of science necessarily renders inaudible the commingling of voices that emerge between the scientists and the frogs. What chorusing reverberations coalesce around the meeting places of human and frog listening and singing? An adjacent listening position is required if we want to hear those frequencies. Bioacoustics has enabled a tracing of frog song across swamps to be heard echoed back through Raven Pro software then further modulated in the sung refrains that biologists swap with animals, hum to themselves, and lodge away as persistent earworms. It's a reverberant circuitry, amplifying, replaying, remixing, revisiting, sometimes even singing along.
So a lot of my questions and interest is on this theme of listening and the perceptual side of your work, and I've had the chance to go in the field with you. I think it's amazing the depth of listening that I've witnessed in your work. Can you just talk to me a little bit about in the day-to-day life of your research generally, or specifically, like how does listening function for you?
Well, frogs, they communicate mostly by sound, and for our work it's super important to hear them. It's the way we can find them, it's the way we can identify them. Each species has a particular calling, and they can be really territorialist, and also is the way they can reproduce. So for me, listening to them is kind of a totally different experience I had. It's the first time I have this in biology, with the sound, the bioacoustics.
When you are in a swamp or in a place that have multiple individuals singing at the same time, usually one of the things that I feel is like the 3D notion of the sound.
I work with Adenomera marmorata. I study the calls that the male produce, the advertisement call. Adenomera is a cryptic species. Like, she looks like leaf where she lives. She lives in a leaf litter. So, like, to find it, you have to listen. First we hear it, and then we just stay close to the sound and try to find where it's come from.
It's super deep. I can't even express the complexity of their communication. For me, when I am in the field, I try to listen all those layers of sound.
Even to find the frogs, I have to train my students how they can use their senses. Especially because in the wild it's a 3D environment. I mean, the frogs could be to the left or to the right, but also on top of the trees. And that's very tricky if you don't turn your head. We have to know how to use our ears as well.
With time, you start getting used to identify where the sound is coming from. You get better to know where the frogs are and which of them are singing. So you start to differentiate them, start to locate them, and everything from your senses, usually at night. So you just have your hearing, and you need to find them. It's a hide and seek in the middle of the forest.
When you start to recognize the animal, the feeling when you listen for the first time, you can separate the other sounds. When you just take one of them, I think it's really, really beautiful, right? Because you start to know the animals and the nature with the other form.
Have you developed like a new insight about your study species through experiences of listening really deeply?
I was in a field trip from here down to the South Brazil, and in the way I was recording the same species of frog, and then I noticed a change in their call. It is not a huge change, but it's a subtle change, and then we discovered a new species, but that was just based on my ears at the beginning.
By going there and seeing they call for 3 months straight, I started noticing patterns. I start to enjoy how the species interact inside the population.
How do you find yourself using or relying on technologies to help mediate the listening that you're doing?
There was an evolution of how we noted the sounds. The first way to have a description of the sound was by the how we hear the sounds. You would describe different than I would describe because we speak different languages. And the second attempt was using notes, music notes. And now we have very complex spectrograms, oscillograms, and usually use that to extract measurements. We have recordings that were made in the 50s. They used a total different kind of recorder that we use today. We have a whole evolution of recording equipment. Today, we mostly use manual recorders with directional microphones and also some automated recorders. With the automated recorders, we can sample an area or different areas over years, even over decades if you want. So it's more practical, for example, to sample an area that is not very accessible. It is not possible to listen to that. It is not possible. So, for example, we could listen to a portion of that and create deep learning algorithms to analyze, identify in a practical way.
Like every technology we create, I see that way. I can be wrong, but we try to imitate our senses. So, and in fact, our senses work together. And it's subjective for each person. I try to really combine my perspectives, and my previous knowledge with technology.
I'm trying to identify one particular species of frog that Darwin described its calls based on music notes, and with that information I'm trying to discover the species of the frog still.
Oh, you're working backwards to find out what the species was.
Yeah.
With more potent recorders, we can start recording with more accuracy, much higher frequencies. And some frogs use the supersonic part of the spectrum to vocalize.
Do you ever feel like singing back to the creatures you're recording?
Actually, we do that. We try to call sometimes to interact with them. They can respond. They can be attracted to if you can imitate their calls with certain fidelity.
All the time we imitate when we hear, and it stays in the mind.
Something like this.
All day long, listen to this frog, and sometimes you are already resting in your house, and then you listen something like beep, 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 beep.
I always try to sing along.
There are some easy ones like.
Some species, they are a lot more shy, and they can see you coming miles away. Can they hear you coming too? Yes.
How do they sense you're listening? What's that kind of relationship there?
The population, they seem to get in this feedback loop. So when one starts singing, the other one starts, and they push each other and go higher and higher. And the other way is true. So when you get there and one stops singing, the other one stops and the other one stops. Like this domino effect. By being there and perceiving this interaction, I understood much better how they perceive the world and how they respond to my presence there, and you start to get this feeling.
But some species are not shy at all. They just keep singing and can put a microphone here and they're not going to stop. Sometimes they can change the way they sing, they call, because of the playback. So sometimes we need to record them before the playback and then after the playback to see if there is a difference.
If we want to study frogs, we have to think like frogs. If they like rain, you have to go out in the rain. If they like swamps at night, you have to go out in the swamps at night. And then after that, you have to understand their behavior, like their rhythm, like their strategies. For example, there is a very common frog, they sing in the floor, but when you get close, they stop singing. And then if you give up looking for these ones, you arrive first and move to a second one. The second one will stop calling, and the first one will start in the moment you leave, and you'll never find them. So you have to be patient. You have to understand they will start calling back once they are used to your presence there. We have to use like dark clothes or invisible in the environment. We have to think what they are looking for and try to mimic that. Doing this type of work, you meditate a lot.
Does listening in the field ever feel like listening to music?
And I think my job in the lab is more like listen to music, because sometimes, I stay almost a whole day listen to sounds that I need to catalog or something like that, and it is like listen to a podcast or something like that.
When I'm, like, for example, in carnival and I hear the drums, it's like give me a lot of emotion, make me want to cry. And with the species in the pond, I felt the same thing as music. So yeah, it makes me feel like emotion.
When frogs start to sing and have a frequency, other species stop to sing. And when they stop, other species start to sing like, okay, it's your turn. You can sing now, like a game. Everyone have the time for singing. Right?
Yes, feels like music because there is organization. It's not chaotic. The sounds, the animals have their tempo. They have rhythm. They respect each other in the sense they try not to call when their neighbor is calling too. We can correlate what's happening in the field with what we call music. Silence, on purpose silence. We have various individuals doing something together with a common purpose, like lots of males trying to attract females.
Like a context. A male starts singing and starts singing faster and faster, and the other one, to not fall behind, starts singing even faster, and this race starts, and at some point they are singing at their maximum capacity.
It is something that they do together. Maybe it is not because they want to be together, to communicate together, but they are together in the same environment. It is, in my opinion, it is really like an orchestra or something like that.
You were in this bog at night, without light, with this atmosphere, with fog, and we had two main species there, but Dendrosophus just started to sing when Buona Faber started first. And for me, it sounds like a beat, the drum starts and then the acompanhamento. I started to try find a pattern in the beat because that's what our brains are used to do, but it doesn't have this logical pattern. But I could tell that something was happening there. So sometimes different individuals, they sing in antiphonia, like alternated, and I know that a complexity of a relationship there. I sing when other species is singing because that way I have less chance to be predated. But also everything was materialized in a sound. So for me that was amazing. I could feel it and my body wanted to move, Choir is plural. It's not just an individual singing. So the experience is totally different. I love chorus. I could sing in church and you feel part of something bigger, and that way you are something different. You are bigger. Sometimes you can feel the extension of yourself, like you expand outside your body.
Frogs is the they are facing a massive extinction globally, and we are already suffering some consequences of that. But we even have sounds that we won't hear anymore, distinct species, but we have recorded. We were lucky enough to have people in the field in the past, so that's maybe something very special for people to listen to.
Using sound as a skill, in fact, now it just transcended that. It's not just a tool. It's not just a skill.
It's a whole method, right?
Yeah, and it's me. It's me. You know, my sense of hear. It's things get more real, more deep. You know, I'm in the field. It's not just words I'm writing on a paper. It's not just something I'm publishing. It's not just metrics and numbers. It's real. It's a whole dimension I can explore, you know. I don't think the problem is the voice of animals, but our capacity to hear them, to listen to them.